Let's wait till Vince gets back there.
I'm here.
Oh, okay. So I thought we would start with Michele, and you would talk about your journey and how you've been, started with your traditional art gallery, and now you're getting ready to, launch a digital art gallery, and what you've learned on your journey. I'd like to talk about how these NFTs are not just, for art. There's a lot of use cases, and if some of you guys could chime in on that. And then I also want to talk about throwing smart contracts, because every NFT has a smart contract, right? And the implications with the smart contracts. So we got that. Then I thought we'd transition over to DeFi, and Vince said you'd want to talk about the Python network and also what Square's up to, all right?
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. And if anybody else wants to jump in with that on DeFi.
Certainly open, yeah.
Also on NFTs, Ronald, if you want to jump in and talk about what you guys are doing, okay? Plus you guys already have your own coin, don't you? Yeah. And then finally, I want to, the third area would be regulation. And then Alan, if you want to lead on that one,
Sure.
talk about what's going on there and regulating DeFi and NFTs and so on and so forth. So we've got NFTs starting off with art, we've got DeFi, and we've got regulation. Anything else you guys want to cover? So, at our last panel discussion, we were talking about different uses for the NFTs. We talked about, Vinci talked about containers and shipping. We've talked about insurance, right? So a lot of different use cases there. It seems like these NFTs are just going to continue to explode from what I'm seeing. So, anything else, guys, you want to throw in there, or no? Michele, anything?
Are we ready?
Yeah.
No, one thing is, if people, considering the market, if anyone has any forecasting or predictions, that might be really interesting. Especially with regard to regulations. That may just come up naturally, but I'm actually really curious about the future.
All right. Well, Alan, you want to throw some stuff out there when we get to it? Although predicting can be there's always an iffy proposition, but okay.
Yeah, if I was good at predicting the future, I'd be doing something else in life. But
there you go.
I think the safest prediction is that we will go from an environment where there's virtually no regulation to an environment that's regulated on par with the rest of the financial services industry.
Yeah, which, by the way, isn't a bad thing, and we shouldn't pretend like it's the end of the world.
And that's why I kind of like Gensler, is he kind of frames all this in the idea that if you want this to survive, then it has to move forward with a regulatory framework around it.
I don't disagree with that proposition at all. What I disagree with is regulation in hindsight, right? So you let people go out and do things for 4 years, and then you shut it down.
Yeah,
you could have laid out the rules from the beginning. And the answer is going to be, well, the rules were out there. You can go read the Supreme Court case as well as anyone else can, and talk to a lawyer and make a judgment about the application of the rules to your facts. That's his answer. But there's sufficient, and what you guys are doing isn't so out of this ecosystem that you can't make that analysis. But the answer is that, well, this is kind of different, and you guys, clarity would be helpful.
Well, yeah, I think, there's a great example of crossover with Reg NMS, and you look at say, I was going to talk a little bit about Python and the way it's revolutionizing the whole data distribution industry. It's going to disrupt the big guys like Bloomberg and ICE and Refinitiv, and if they're supplying this data, and if these are actual traded prices and so on, they have to be flashed in a fully public manner, just like prices from any other venue. And I don't think a lot of people are complying with that yet. In fact, I wonder if that's not what they're after Uniswap about.
Okay, guys, listen, it's 2:59. We'll start promptly at 3. I'm first going to have everybody go and introduce themselves, okay?
Sure.
And then I'll take...
How long? Like a minute or...
Yeah, not long. Yeah, no more than a minute. Just who you are, what you do. Michele, for you, you've been running this traditional art gallery, you're transitioning to a digital art gallery, so on and so forth. But catch your major points. Like Ron, you want to talk about, you guys have your own blockchain network, you got your own coin, so that's going to really stand out and grab people's attention. Try to catch the highlights. So So I'll start and then I'll pass. And then once you go through the introduction, we'll go Michele, we're on top. We'll go on top, Michele, and then Vince, and then Alan, and then Ronald, and then I'll introduce myself, and then we're good to go. Okay?
All right.
Hi, welcome to our panel. The theme is what's hot in NFTs and DeFi, and where do we go from here? I'm David Carman. I'll be your moderator. I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. Michele, you want to go first?
Yes, hi. Thank you, David, for hosting this and moderating. My name is Michele Maccarone. I have owned and operated a traditional gallery for the past 20 years, and I am now transitioning from a traditional brick and mortar gallery to a digital only gallery that will exhibit and sell digitally native artworks as NFTs.
Thanks, Michele. Vince, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Vince Turcotte. I'm with Eventus Systems. We are a firm that works in the market surveillance part of the business, trade reporting, algo monitoring, and so on. And we work with a number of different digital exchanges across Asia Pacific as well as globally. So our interest in this is very much from the the regulation and the enforcement side, as well as in the data industry that surrounds the world of NFTs and of course DeFi.
Thanks, Vince. Alan, you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely, David. Thank you, and delighted to join you for the session today. I'm Alan Konevsky. I'm the interim chief executive officer and chief legal officer at tZero. tZero is one of the leading pioneers in the United States in the digital security space. We also offer our customers access to cryptocurrencies and other services. I came to tZero after 20 years at Goldman Sachs, MasterCard, and Sullivan & Cromwell, focusing on highly regulated industries, including financial services, technology, and other aspects. And for me, this is a really exciting synthesis of that background, and as we look into the DeFi future.
Thanks, Alan. And Ronald, you want to go next? You're muted, Ronald. Can't hear you. Can't hear you. Ronald?
Yes, I can hear you.
There you go. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you very much for inviting me to come to the panel. It's very interesting to be here, and it's my honor as well. My name is Ronald. I'm a CEO and Chief Executive Officer of Bholdus. We run an independent blockchain where we want to help businesses such as NFT qualified businesses in music, in movies, or in GameFi, as well as the metaverse developers to build their NFT issuance on our own blockchain. We're based in Southeast Asia, where it's at the hottest place on earth for NFT as well as the metaverse, and we're here to tell the world that in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of good business that we can help. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ronald. And once again, I'm David Carman. I'm a co-founder and board member of Global DCA, the Global Digital Asset and Cryptocurrency Association. We're headquartered here in Chicago, and our mission is to develop and advocate for a regulatory framework that supports the growth of a healthy, dynamic crypto industry. So welcome. Thank you for joining our panel. We think you'll be pleased with what areas we covered today. So I'd first like to start with Michele. And Michele, most participants in the NFT ecosystem appear to be, their main goal is to monetize their art. Your journey is a little bit different. So could you please tell us what led you into NFTs and what's going on with your new digital art gallery? So.
Thank you, David. Again, I'm the least versed on this panel about crypto and even NFTs. I have to say, I came about the space through just kind of conceptualizing a way to be able to create a market for digital art and conceptual art. In my world, I'm a specialist in digital art, installation art, conceptual art, more so than painting and sculpture. And I realized that there is a collector base that easily buys painting and sculpture, and it was really much more difficult to sell kind of more ethereal works. And I was just casually talking to a friend about, oh, I wish there was a way that digital and conceptual art could be really authenticated in a way that a market could be established and built. And there's so many important artists and voices which are just not strong in the marketplace. And he said, what are you talking about? That's called an NFT. And I said, oh, you've got to tell me about this. So about a year and a half ago, I started talking to my artists about transitioning their work, their digital work, and selling them as NFTs, as opposed to digital art being printed out as a photograph. And I got a lot of resistance. Everyone wanted to have an in-person exhibition. And finally, after one of my artists had a really successful sale on Nifty Gateway, I think a lot of people turned around. And now my phone is ringing off the hook with artists who want to produce and exhibit NFTs. So I'm now in the process of building a platform in which we will be exhibiting. I hate to call it a marketplace because it really is a digital gallery, and I see a big difference in the sense that what we're going to be presenting is more of a curated space, more representing artists, kind of taking the model of a traditional gallery and translating it to the metaverse. And I'm really interested in the idea of smart contracts becoming very bespoke and being able to sort of capture the history of conceptual art, where a lot of artists left legacies of instructions only or installations which have to be rebuilt. And this work is very difficult to commoditize and sell. And I think that we'll be able to revive careers of artists that are long past. Oh, David, we can't hear you.
Could you talk a little bit about the different issues that these NFTs are solving for you in the traditional art space? You mentioned, I think, something about authentication, forgeries. Are there any other areas that it's helping you out with?
Well, authentication with digital art is incredibly important because the way it traditionally works is if I sell a video, I would give someone a piece of paper that's signed by the artist, and people lose these pieces of paper. They can be invalidated really easily. Digital art can just be taken off, a video can just be taken off and distributed however. And so this way we can kind of manage the provenance and manage the authenticity of each addition to artwork. And again, I was mentioning smart contracts and mentioning conceptual art, which absolutely needs a venue and it needs a medium. And I look at NFTs as a medium as though they're authentic or paintings. And certainly I'm really interested in selling works that are one of a kind as well as editions. And it's solving the problem of creating a market for works which are otherwise not really collected and don't have the value of a painting. I mean, the most expensive digital art or even photograph, I mean, they kind of cap off at $1 million. And that's no longer true with NFTs. As you can see, they're selling for the tens of millions of dollars. And I don't even see this as a money grab. I mean, for me, entering the space had nothing to do with, I started entering the space before the very frothy, as we call it, market. And for me, it was just about a way of solving these authentication issues and market issues. Okay. And so for me, it's a long-term project. It's not a money grab for the moment.
Well, certainly when this guy who goes by the name Beeple sold his digital art collection for $69 million at Christie's Gallery, that really put NFTs on the map.
I think we'll continue to see that. I think we'll continue to see prices like that for specific works, especially something as complicated as what he proposed. It was an archive of 5,000 artworks. And I think you'll see more of these kinds of collections, which are going to exist as one of ones, which are in and of themselves so innovative. You'll see more generative art. You'll see real innovation, technology, coded NFTs. And I think that there's going to be a really long-term, very established market.
Well, let me ask you this. If Leonardo da Vinci were alive today, would he be painting the Mona Lisa? Is
No,
it-
I think he'd be making NFTs, and maybe he would have invented NFTs. I mean, he was a real innovator. Artists are innovators and inventors. And I think technology is a form of art. And I've always been interested in this idea of a collusion between fine art, technology, and entertainment. And technology is becoming the space for culture. And our screens are going to be where we experience culture more and more. I know that's kind of a pessimistic view, but I just feel like everything's moving toward the metaverse and digital.
Okay, so let's talk about a couple terms here, depending upon how sophisticated our audience. Who would like to talk a little bit about what smart contracts are and how they're really going to benefit the artists going forward? Anybody want to jump in here? Ronald? Or no? Alan? Go ahead, Alan. Yeah.
Sure,
Well,
absolutely.
Ronald, go ahead. Go ahead. You start. I can weigh in as
Right.
well.
Right. Okay. This for me, the smart contract is something that's really meaningful and it's amazing. It's a part of blockchain technology innovation, right? Because in the past, it's very difficult to do business with each other if we don't know each other. And smart contract is really helped to reduce the trust, because I believe the trust is something critical when it deal with any kind of trade transactions, right? So with a smart contract, we can actually eliminate that kind of trust, and it's make the system more transparent. For example, like what Michele mentions, let's say you want to sell a piece of art, right, to different others people, you can actually utilize the smart contract to ensure that people, the transactions being monitored closely and is immutable, right? So all kinds of smart contract will help to facilitate from end-to-end solution, from purchasing all the way into like selling, and then even as well as whether to, the artwork, whether it's in good quality control and all this. So all this point, you can actually embed all kinds of transaction on blockchain and making sure that all is being transparent and all kinds of transactions being monitoring with the immutable record. So definitely, all these kind of functions is help to reduce the trust. For me,
Can I just jump in for one? Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Coming in, yeah.
One of the things that are really important with smart contracts are historically artists don't receive royalties or receive percentages of future sales. And this is something that's a real, I don't know how else to say it, it's a real bummer, and it's a problem in the art world. And, you could sell your work for $100, and then of course it's worth $100,000 or $100 million, and you don't receive any proceeds from that. Now with smart contracts, artists and artist estates in perpetuity can receive their royalties and their percentage of future sales. This is going to revolutionize the gallery business, the auction business, and will facilitate so much of an artist community.
Alan, can you talk a little bit about that? I assume it depends upon how these smart contracts are written, doesn't it? And how it plays out.
100%, David and Ronald, and it's a great overview. I was speaking at an event where the SEC Commissioner Peirce spoke at as well, and she remarked on the beauty of these sort of self-regulating smart contracts that are transparent, immutable, sit on a single global technology layer, and really, to Ronald's point, bridge the trust gap. Bridge the trust gap, not through layers of intermediaries that bring with them opaqueness, cost, friction, lack of access, value leakage, opportunities for asymmetry of access and information, and therefore potential for mischief, but through a single layer, natively digital, self-regulating bit of code, right? And this kind of where people, whether they're creators, whether they're consumers, can interact with no to minimal intermediation. And that's kind of the idea. Of course, the way we'll get there is going to be step by step. And behind that beauty, behind that vision, behind that new way to bridge trust at a distance, is a bit of code, and it's transparent, it's immutable. It does what it's programmed to do. It runs on a distributed ecosystem that's subject to a consensus building process across the numerous nodes that are distributed across the world, and is therefore a perfect medium for the kind of things that Michele was talking about, whether it's natively digital art or whether it's record keeping for physical art, where again, provenance is a major issue. Look, I do believe, look, I don't really know what Leonardo would do. I think Michele describes a terrifically exciting kind of reimagining, and it's nice to think about it. But I do think that if I look at my kids, who are no Leonardo da Vinci's, but more than half of their toys are virtual toys. Right? It's games and objects that they bought with my money in those games, and the percentage of that is increasing. So generationally, you have people who are perfectly okay with owning virtual, intangible digital assets, and that will continue. So will people still draw stuff on paper and carve stuff out of marble? I think so. Is it going to become more of a niche exercise? Probably. And as people continue to own stuff virtually, right, there is a secular need to ensure that provenance and record keeping are kosher, to ensure that things trade in transparent marketplaces. If things fall in the rubric of regulated assets, we'll talk about that in a bit, that they comply with appropriate rules, and that consumers are not exposed to buying assets that have problems that come with sponsors or creators not complying with the law. And so I think there's a secular problem there, and smart contracts and blockchain solve that problem that exists independent of the technology, I think. And it's a secular generational shift that's not going to go away.
So we've talked about how the NFT can authenticate the ownership of the art. We've talked about how it can help them monetize the art. But also these, I want to talk about the smart contract. The really big deal from the artist standpoint is that smart contract allows them to make royalties ad infinitum, right? So in the traditional art world, you sell a painting for, let's say, $1 million, the artist gets $1 million. But in the future, every time that piece of art changes hands and gets sold, they get a percentage of that too, correct?
Yeah.
It's a smart contract, not in the real world.
Right.
That's one use of them. And then you're already seeing an impact in the music world, because a lot of people are using smart contracts. Now we're lining up to use smart contracts to collect royalties on songs. They're assigning value to them, and then as the value changes, then the artist can continue to appreciate that. So it's sort of a counter to the way that the music industry had devolved into the world of iTunes, from the world of albums and royalties that were embedded then.
Well, the NFTs, I wanted to get to, these NFTs are just not restricted to the art world. You mentioned music, Vince. Alan, you had mentioned gaming. I've heard that they're being used for what they call virtual land, that they're used for other areas of finance like insurance. You guys talk a little bit about these other use cases?
Yeah, I mean, a smart contract is really, as I think has been pointed out, nothing more than a box of code. And under certain conditions, that code is activated. And it could be something as mundane as filling out a form to sell and move a package of goods. Let's say they're electronic components from one place to another. And if you fill out that form online, there's the option, once you push go, for it to compute the shipping costs. That's pretty standard. For it then to go and find insurance for your product, for it then to go and find financing for it. Let's say it's a shipment of transistors or something very microchips, something very expensive. And all of that can be done now without the intervention of each individual part of that process. It can be done automatically by smart contracts. There's a lot of room for user intervention. You may be offered a choice of insurance policies, for instance. You may be offered a choice of financing options. But those are all things that are taking place because of a smart contract. And when smart contracts actually preceded blockchain, and they've been around for a long time. And if you look at the marriage, I think as was pointed out by Ronald, of smart contracts and blockchain technology, that's really where things become interesting, because that's where the immutability comes in, where the long history of transaction record comes in. But it's also, there are a couple of risks there, and we're still in early days. And I think Ronald would agree that an error or a bug in code is something that lasts forever once you embed it in a smart contract. And when this happens in a large scale, for instance, on a blockchain network, or let's say like the Ethereum network, where they're able to fork it, that's great. But if it happens on smaller scale, where you don't have a large consensus building process around it, it can also be very costly. So they're still in the early days of developing, this stuff. I think in theory and concept, it's fantastic. There's so much going on, but I think we also have to sort of temper this a little bit and make sure that we don't get ahead of our technology.
Okay. Also, I think, Michele, you mentioned the term metaverse. Could you explain what that term means?
For me, it means the future world. And I feel like we're moving into this other space, and the fact that you can buy real estate and buy racing horses. And my dream is to put artists into the metaverse, in the sense that there's this new universe where they can build their own worlds. And my dream is to sort of like the collaboration between Walt Disney and Salvador Dali, where he's creating a world. I would love to see artists, and I would love to, there's certain artists and I would love to live inside their world. And so for me, it means that. I think it means several things to different people. And for me, that's the goal. Is I want to live there.
What I think is really cool about what Michele is doing is that she's a gallery owner. She's a professional curator, and she can bring value, by illustrating the world of the artist. She can do a proper show. We look at some of the platforms now that are available for NFT trading. I know FTX just went live in their platform in Asia, I think last week.
Yeah,
they were inundated by pictures of fish.
Right.
Which is pretty hilarious. But it was, and they're trying to sort of work the kinks out of that. But I think contrasting a generic marketplace with what Michele is doing as a curator, I think is really important. And I think that's where we'll see the value in some of these projects going forward.
Yeah, my understanding of the metaverse is basically you're talking about virtual worlds, right? An online virtual world, correct? Okay.
I like to add a little,
Sure.
some more points to metaverse. For me, metaverse is something amazing when it comes to the borderless kind of world, the virtual world, right? As of now, the end COVID-19 is still happening all over the world, right? And people are stuck at home, and it's so difficult for them to make money. And if you look at Philippine market, right, one of the largest market for Axie Infinity, one of the top hottest trend in the world right now, right? People stuck at home, people cannot make money, and they can't make a living. What can they do right now? They play a game to earn money, right? So that is amazing. And the GameFi businesses around the world can transform into different types of business model as well. It can be play to earn, work to earn, live to earn, watch to earn, or whatever things they can do virtually to make a living. And for metaverse, is scalable in terms of in terms of feasibility, right? We don't touch when it comes to regulations. This is totally new world, new supply, new demand, right? We are not touching the existing the existing market of financial institutions, right? That is, for cryptocurrency market is all about uncertainty related to regulation, right? And regulatory framework. For metaverse, GameFi, welcome to the game. We are not coming to any kinds of existing business model with those banks or central banks, right? This is totally entire new thing. And I'm sure it's opened up a new types of virtual workplace, virtual workforce, right? For everyone to make a living, and regardless where you are from, you become, nowadays there's no longer one market, one country, right? We are all the same, right? I remember I read a book written by Richard Branson, who defined the borders, basically the politician, right? So we are the one, we are Homo sapien, We become one country, one earth, right? So we can really open up the entire world and entire market. Yeah. So that's my 2 cents.
Well, most people probably don't know is like, as you said, Ronald, they have what they call play to earn. You actually make money. You can make a nice income actually playing video games, right?
Yeah.
And then you buy the NFTs that may help you improve your odds of winning the game and so on and so forth. So there's an awful lot we can
And
get
by
in.
the way, David, can I just weigh in for a second? I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think it's that secular need, right? And it's kind of goes back to, you know, my kids and kind of and their toys. There's a change. That change is happening whether you like it or not. That change is creating a need for people who will need to interact with these items of value that are now intangible and interact in a way that still addresses that fundamental trust deficit that comes with human psychology. Can't even in the metaverse, you still have it. And NFTs create a way for people to interact with these items of value at a distance in a way that's far better. Could you recreate the current physical trust-based ecosystem with a bunch of intermediaries and middlemen to deal with virtual assets? Probably. You know, are you going to live with some kind of temporary ecosystem where you have some old and some new? Probably. But you know, the secular world, the secular outcome is going to be people interacting with digitally native representations of these assets directly through a global single technology layer that is self-regulating.
Sounds like a very different world, whether you call it metaverse or something else, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's enough on NFTs. I hope our audience gets an idea of just how big these are becoming. It's not some fad that's going to go away. I wanted to transition more to overall DeFi. Vince, you want to say a couple things about what's going on in the DeFi space that are of interest to you?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think right now there are two things that are really interesting, and I loved Ronald's point about where you know, things that don't touch the sides, where there's a metaverse that exists that doesn't interact with the current regulatory setup and current financial financial services environment. There's one that's called Pyth that I think is really cool, and it's using the Solana blockchain to build a series of oracles, which are price references that are used in the world of decentralized finance. So they have a number of contributors, both from the world of cryptocurrencies and also from the world of regular securities and, you know, futures and options and foreign exchange and equities and bonds and so on. And they're providing reference prices through Pyth that'll be used as oracles. And those oracles are obviously used to mark prices within decentralized finance, within a DeFi exchange, for instance. That's really cool to me. And to me, it's doing two things. First is good, and that's disrupting the traditional world of financial market data, where that data is traditionally owned by exchanges who then distribute it through large second parties like ICE will do it, and ICE Data, certainly the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, Refinitiv, Bloomberg, companies like that have had a monopoly on this business for a long time. Now, suddenly you have these prices all available through another channel. And it's not unlike when, you know, back in the day when Instinet first came around and the fourth market, for instance, for trading securities. I think that they're going to interact with the world of real world of asset exchanges through Reg NMS, and that should be interesting to watch how it unfolds. It's here to stay. It's going to be a disruptive force, but how it integrates into the existing regulatory framework, I think, remains to be seen. Mm-hmm. The other one I really, really like is Jack Dorsey's moonshot. And he seems to be, if you put the pieces together, I was at Bitcoin 2021 and he was there speaking very enthusiastically about the Lightning Network and how that second layer transaction network could really up the power of Bitcoin, which he considers to be the currency of the internet. That's his vision, his framework for it. So he, of course, has Twitter, which has billions of users worldwide. And then he has Square, which is manufacturing a wallet that will no doubt be marketed on Twitter. You can see that Bitcoin has just had a soft fork with Taproot, so that they can actually begin using. You can actually start putting together dApps and DeFi protocol using Bitcoin. And then finally, I guess the last piece is the Lightning Network that you put over the top of it. So one day I'm walking down the street, I see an ad for a new wallet on Twitter, and I click on that. I move some of my Bitcoin over there, and I start using it to transact, not just in the world of in our new world of Bitcoin, but I can also go and do fiat transactions as well using the Lightning Network. So it's pretty cool, and I think that the combination of these factors these are real world applications. These are things that are happening right now, and they are going to both disrupt existing financial services structures, which I think makes them exceptionally interesting.
What Dorsey is working on then will allow you to, say, repatriate money, either fiat or crypto, anywhere?
That's the goal, is to be able to, first of all, transact in crypto. So if you have a website that is crypto friendly that you want to buy something from, of course, you use the Lightning Network there. But ultimately, they'd like to be able to do, Lightning Network is capable of doing fiat transaction conversions using the dApps that I mentioned earlier. So that's sort of I think the vision that he has for it.
And who's going to be most threatened by this disruption? The banks, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so sure that the disintermediation threatens the banks as much as it does the more traditional providers of these services, the Visas and MasterCards and Discovers of the world, American Express, people like that. It isn't going to be a major threat to them immediately, but over a longer haul, a medium horizon of 2 to 5 years, I think it will significantly impact the way they do business.
Well,
Vince, I agree. And by the way, in the short term, when people say disintermediate, they usually mean I want to be your intermediary and not somebody else.
That's very true.
Even if in the longer term we may get to this vision of digitally native tech layer of value, the internet of money, where people interact peer to peer. But in the short term, it's I want to be intermediary, not this guy. So it's and that's one of the reasons why regulators are being kind of skeptical and cautious about the DeFi journey and digital assets generally, including cryptos, because they say, well, look, you guys talk about decentralization, but you seem to be pretty centralized to me.
Yeah, and I think that's one of Gensler's points. It's funny, when we were talking earlier about Hester Peirce, we had a forum at Eventus where she was on, and she was actually very good. I love listening to her talk. She's visionary, but one of the terms that she used was mildly amusing, and she called it a DeFi mullet, where the trust factor that we've all been talking about. A lot of individual consumers are still not quite ready to accept some of these peer-to-peer transactions or operating in a new network that they know nothing about. So they would want to go to somebody like, I don't know, let's say a digital Charles Schwab, and say, I want you to handle the messy part of the transaction. So that's the clean part, the front part that's got a nice haircut. And when he turns around, he's got a long mullet on, because all the business that happens in the back is going to be happening on these dApp protocols and on DEX exchanges. So it's a pretty interesting transitionary phase, but I think she's right. I think that there's going to be a lot of that in the initial phases.
I'd like to add one more point regarding about the DeFi and the cryptocurrency adoptions. I actually born in the emerging countries where more than 60% of people are unbanked and they are underserved by the bank. No one serving them.
Yep.
Right. So nowadays with the internet, with a laptop or mobile phone, they can jump into the entire world, and they have access to financial industries around the world. They have access to a lot of other things, and that creates that help the social impact of the entire world, and it helps people to make dreams. That is something amazing. That's something is normally people in the West, people in the developed countries who have access to lending, right, to financial big capabilities. But people in emerging countries, they don't. Looking at SME financing, if they want to start their business, it's so difficult to make a funding or to seek funding, even to gain customer base. How are they going to help? DeFi is totally is totally going to be a game changer for all these types of businesses. Yeah.
Well, that's a great point, and I think not only Jack Dorsey gets it, but there are a couple of exchanges in Africa who are that's their vision as well, where they've gone out and found ways to get people banked off of their smartphones that had never had an opportunity to use a bank or to do transactions in any other way except cash. And I think you're going to see obviously a lot more of that coming. There's a point where we have to kind of pull back though and say, at what pace is this adoption appropriate? How are we really going to do this before the regulatory framework that we all know is coming begins to sort of take shape? Mm-hmm. Alan, your point before we started the call about regulating by enforcement and looking over your shoulder at something that happened 4 years ago may not be the way forward. I'm really excited for them to get together. I mean, the Financial Actions Task Force has done a lot with crypto generically, but I really think that there's a need for another association specifically around DeFi to sort of come up and become the spokesperson for the industry or the standard setter that enough people will adopt.
Yeah, 100%, I think. And there also needs to be a global reach here. And SEC Chair Gensler talked to, I think, the European Parliament the other day, and he made the point that you're looking at a global ecosystem. Mm-hmm. In order to survive, it has to be regulated, and this regulation has to be global. And previous attempts at getting some kind of global, at a minimum, coordination on financial regulatory topics have been met with mixed to little success. And financial services and pretty much every other piece of regulation is still very balkanized and national. But I think you will need some kind of a global approach to this set of topics in order for the promise of a global intranet of money to work. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of islands and you're going to have an archipelago, but you're not going to deliver on the main promise of global seamless movement of value, which, by the way, Ronald, we tend to be very US centric and say, well, why do I need DeFi? My bank account works pretty well. You got to have a global perspective on it. A vast majority of human population is unbanked or underbanked. And so these products and services do wonders for that segment of the population. Likewise, when you talk about Bitcoin as a store of value, you say, well, it's been kind of a failure because of price volatility. Depends for whom. If you're living in a country of hyperinflation, Bitcoin is a pretty good store of value because it may go up or down 5 to 10%, but it's not going up 1,000% a day as your local currency is devaluing. So you got to have a global perspective on it, and you got to have real narrow focus on products. That's something we as an industry will love to talk about concepts because it's exciting. It's like figuring out the origin of the universe or the metaverse, as the case might be. But you can't regulate ideas. You can't regulate metaverses. You can't regulate DeFi. That's why, I agree with regulators who face that challenge. You regulate very specific applications for very specific people in very specific geographies. And we as an industry have to come up with a better consumer articulation of what we're doing, why it's better, and how we think it should be regulated, including, Vince, to your point, coming up with standards and practices and all of the things that exist in other industries.
Well, and it is when you talk about regulation, and I think it's an interesting point. Who are you regulating? In the case of the traditional CFTC or any other country I've lived in, and I've been fortunate to have lived all over the world, but there's always a point of locus for the regulators, and it may be the exchange, it may be the intermediaries, or it may be individuals. But generally, it's in that order. The exchanges serve their function of credit protection and as a regulatory bucket where everything where the rubber meets the road. Now we're looking at a world now where they'll only be regulating individuals, And so there won't be, for instance, the standards of licensing and the general market knowledge that you're required to have if you act as an intermediary. So how do you both regulate and protect people in that pool? And that's really what they have to get to. And I think that they are coming in that direction. I have confidence. I spend a lot of time with the SFC in Hong Kong and some of the other regulators in Asia. And they're more clued up, I think, than a lot of people give them credit for. They're moving forward with what looks to me to be sensible ideas, despite the constraints of their traditional structure, meaning that they have to get a new law passed in order for them to actually have this authority to regulate this type of activity. So those are the restrictions that they have, but their ideas and their thoughts and their knowledge of the ecosystem is actually much, much better than we often give them credit for.
Yeah, I agree. That's one thing. Sort of, we kind of stand up when we wave our hands and we say we want more clarity, we want less enforcement, we want it now. We don't really appreciate, for example, in the security space, the SEC came out with a statement on custody of digital asset securities, how much work it takes. And when you meet with the individual commissioners and SEC staff, how much work it takes from a political, policy, and mechanical perspectives to get there. And we need to appreciate it. And we also need to narrow our focus, right? You can't regulate blockchain. You can't regulate DeFi. You can regulate very specific use cases of the very specific products. And I know it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem because it's hard to come up with products in an uncertain environment. And it's hard to regulate concepts and not specific products. But on the balance, the industry needs to lead with specificity.
I would agree. I think rough guidelines are not enough. Rough guidelines plus enforcement is not really enough. But these standards have to evolve quickly, and people have to start getting behind them. Otherwise, that's what we'll be left with is a pile of enforcement cases.
Yep.
I agree that it's a cross-border product and we need global regulation. But I think it's a really big challenge because here in the U.S. alone, to herd all the different regulatory agencies together would be a major accomplishment. I think there must be 8 or 9 of them, right? You got the SEC, the CFTC, the OCC, you got the Fed, the FDIC, the FTC, one after the other. Who do you think is best suited to bring about some type of global coordination to drive this regulatory environment forward?
You're forgetting the states. Each state regulates money transmission laws, and so that's really the crucible of crypto regulation in the U.S. for now, pending developments out of Washington. Who's best suited? Look, we've seen this problem come up time and time again when people want some coordination, people want cohesion, and whether they're trying to using the existing supranational bodies and infrastructure, the World Bank, the IMF, kind of interagency coordination agreements that the SEC has with its sister agencies globally, or other types of forums. And, there's been mixed success at that, So I don't think a new kind of sovereign supranational agency is the answer or is a possibility here. I think the most viable outcome is going to be greater coordination at a political and regulatory level among the existing agencies. That's my guess.
I think that there's room for industry associations as well. I mean, I lived through the birth of the swaps market and watched how ISDA took a prominent role there. And I come from the background in financial futures, and I look how the various industry associations there really stepped up and helped guide the regulators. We have, again, in Hong Kong, a very interactive relationship from the RegTech committee of the Hong Kong FinTech Association, but we're allowed to give input to the regulators, and I feel that we're heard, and that they know that they're talking to people in the industry, and they know that they're being guided towards a best use, and they really are open to receiving it. So I think there we have a very good and symbiotic relationship. I'm not sure about many of the other jurisdictions, but my own experiences with it has been pretty positive. And regulators, again, in my experience, tend to be open to hearing your input. They may or may not take it too seriously, but I'd love to see an industry association come together with a coherent plan that they can go to regulators on a regular basis without being seen as lobbyists. on the political side. I think that would be great.
I think that's right, Vince. And I think there's also, David, I'm sorry, one other thing is there's, people kind of in this, innovators generally, including in this space, tend to confuse getting an answer you don't want to hear with a broken system. Right? When you get an answer you don't want to hear, you persuade, you educate, you lobby for reform. You don't necessarily claim that the system is broken and try to work around it.
Yep.
Which is kind of what Coinbase did the other day. Huh?
Right. I'd like to add one more point, beside I totally agree with Vince and Alan's about asking the top regulators, the industry associations members to come in all in once to build out a global kind of regulation framework for all the country in different types of jurisdiction. But I like to add one more point regarding about the top leading crypto businesses out there, should put a hands on those countries. Let's say Cardano, Ethereum, Binance, Solana, or even ourselves, Bholdus. We should work closely with the regulator, giving them the sandbox environments, giving them the open source code for them to try out different types of technology solution. Because we have a capability to do all this kind of sandbox arrangement. This actually open up the new door to them, because to us, people like always on the crowd, we understand the business, we understand the rules and regulation, right? And we need to have more types of these people to come and knock the door to central banks, right? For example, in Singapore to MAS or SEC in the US, right? To giving them the trial test and all this. So this is very important, very key part, because if they don't try it out, we will never get there. So you can see that, yeah.
That is an awesome point. And MAS has actually done a pretty good job with that. They have a sandbox operating right now, and it's produced a few decent firms already. And they also do things like sponsor competitions. Recently, they set something up for CBDCs. They want to see the top use cases for CBDCs. They want to see the top systems for interacting with CBDCs across both crypto and fiat networks. And a lot of people come running in there with all these great ideas. Hong Kong does the same thing. Hong Kong has an incubator project out at Cyberport that is sponsored by HKMA, and that's also done very, very well. These types of initiatives, I think, are very symbiotic. The regulators learn a great deal, and a lot of startup level people are really incented to build product alongside the regulators.
I think it's a win for both, because it facilitates innovation, and the regulators and lawmakers are right there from the very beginning to see what they're doing, and hopefully they're in relationship with one another. I know one of the things we're working on at Global DC, we'd love to have a federal sandbox and really help facilitate innovation. That alone is a big challenge. But if you look at the US, ideally, who would you want to be in charge of regulating the crypto industry? The SEC, the CFTC, somebody else? Anybody come to mind? Or I think it's probably going to be a bunch of them the way it's playing out, but
I think it's going to end up like stock index product did. If you look at, for instance, the CFTC's regulation of the futures contracts that actually drive the pricing of a lot of instruments that fall under the auspices of the SEC. And I don't see a problem with them both having their toe in the water, as long as they're working together.
How about in Southeast Asia? Who do you think would be the best regulator there? Anybody come to mind? Or
well, they really talk to each other. That much we know for sure. And they, we've had several meetings with the regulators in Japan, and obviously in Singapore and Hong Kong, and they do communicate. I don't think that there's so much a need for a single regulator as in that case as a common set of standards. And what they've done is taken the clue from the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, and they literally explicitly cite FATF guidelines within some of the new regulations that they've published. So that's a case of an industry association or a quasi-government body stepping forward with a common set of regulations that spans across all the different jurisdictions. And those, they're being, I wouldn't say adopted wholesale or lock, stock, and barrel, but they're being adopted in a very cooperative way. I mean, there's also a little corner of bad actors, and you see them everywhere. in every kind of market, as we discussed earlier. But there are a bunch of people out there that believe that the anonymity of crypto and the KYC aspect are completely at odds with each other. And that group of guys is always going to be pushing the envelope, not necessarily breaking rules, but seeing exactly what they can get away with and what they can do just to fulfill the minimum requirements. So there's going to be a real need to keep an eye on that crowd too, and they're everywhere. I mean, at the BTC 2021 conference, you walked in the door and there was a big sign that said KYC is the problem. And so it was one of the vendors that was there, but it's just, there's still that attitude, and it's still fairly pervasive.
Well, wherever you have money in particular, I'm sure you're going to find some bad actors. And
Sure.
to say that you don't need regulation is like saying, well, maybe we shouldn't have a police department. I mean, this basically, I look at the FINRA as being the police department here for the financial industry here in the US for the most part. Well, listen, we're at time, and I hope that our audience learned a lot. There's so much more we could talk about. We could probably talk a whole week about all the different topics and do a deep dive. But we hope you get a sense that this space is moving forward. These NFTs and DeFi, they're not going to go away. The trends are pretty obvious. They're both gaining momentum. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. And we hope that you enjoy this whole conference. So thank you so much. And I want to thank all our panelists for all your valuable insights. So thanks, guys. Good luck with your endeavors. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.